The first sound was a splintering crack, sharp and brutally violent, tearing through the fragile, pre-dawn stillness of the high desert. Liam Hayes jolted awake in his grandfather's worn leather armchair, the dog-eared copy of Abby he'd been rereading, sliding unheeded to the rough-hewn wooden floor. His heart hammered against his ribs, a panicked, frantic drumbeat in the vast, empty quiet that was usually his solace. He'd been dreaming of his grandfather, a vivid, comforting dream, the two of them out, on the old wooden deck side by side in silence, watching the sun bleed crimson and molten gold across the distant shadowy mesas. A shared ritual from a lifetime ago. Another crash, closer this time, unmistakably destructive, accompanied by the sickening, protracted groan of stressed ancient timber. He scrambled from the chair, his bare feet cold on the worn floorboards, and lunged towards the small deep-set window of the adobe cabin, his sanctuary, the only place left in his world where the incessant grinding noise of the modern world truly fell away, leaving only the whisper of the wind and the cry of the hawk. Floodlights, harsh, invasive clinical beams, cut through the velvet pre-dawn darkness, glinting malevolently off the wicked, serrated teeth of a bulldozer's massive maw. And that maw, he saw with a surge of disbelief, quickly hardening into rage, was tearing into his deck, his grandfather's deck, the one they had built together, plank by weathered sun-bleached plank, the summer he turned 16, a summer of sweat, shared laughter, and quiet lessons in patience and craftsmanship. Rage, cold and immediate and pure, surged through him, a wildfire chasing away the last clinging tendrils of sleep and dream. He threw on a pair of scuffed boots and a faded chambray shirt, not bothering with socks or buttons, bursting out the cabin door into the shockingly chilly desert air. The acrid, unfamiliar scent of diesel fumes was already fouling the clean, familiar fragrance of creosote and dust and olfactory assault. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" he yelled, his voice, hoarse raw from sleep, almost entirely swallowed by the guttural roar and hydraulic whine of the monstrous machine. A figure detached itself from the deeper shadows near a gleaming, oversized white pickup truck, a vehicle that screamed ostentation against the muted desert backdrop. Its silhouette was sharply, almost theatrically framed by the aggressive glare of the portable floodlights. Martha Thorne, president of the Prickly Pear Estates Homeowners Association. Clipboard clutched in one perfectly manicured hand, her silver hair immaculately coiffed even at this ungodly, destructive hour. Her expression, illuminated by the harsh light, was one of serene, implacable, almost beatific authority. As if she were overseeing a civic beautification project, not an act of vandalism. "Mr. Hayes," she stated, her voice clear and cutting, slicing through the mechanical din with a practiced, chilling ease that spoke of countless boardroom battles won. "We are enforcing Covenant 7.3, subsection B, viewline integrity and aesthetic harmony. Your unauthorized deck structure was found to be in significant violation." Violation? Liam's voice cracked disbelief, warring with a rising tide of fury. "It's been here for 30 years. My grandfather built it with his own hands. It's part of this land." He could see, even in the chaotic light, the splintered, shattered remains of the sturdy railings, the deep, ugly gouges in the thick support posts that had stood for decades. It was carnage, a desecration. Ownership tenure and sentimental value do not negate covenant compliance, Mr. Hayes. Martha Thorne's tone was devoid of any discernible emotion, flat and final. "You were sent 3 certified notices regarding the nonconformity of the aforementioned structure and the required remediation. Notices? I haven't received any damn notices." He lived a deliberately solitary, disconnected life, checking his P.O. box in the tiny, dusty nearby town of Redemption, sporadically, sometimes only once a month. This cabin, this life, was about escaping bureaucracy and its endless paper trails, not meticulously engaging with it. Martha Thorne merely arched a perfectly sculpted silver eyebrow, a subtle dismissive gesture that spoke volumes. The notices were dispatched via registered mail to the address on file with the county assessor's office. "It is your individual responsibility as a property owner within the Prickly Pear Estates designated zone to maintain current contact information and adhere to all established community standards and aesthetic guidelines." The demolition was approved by unanimous board vote at last month's duly convened meeting. Her gaze, cold and appraising, flicked dismissively towards the mangled, splintered wood as if it were roadkill. Frankly, Mr. Hayes, it was an eyesore, a dilapidated relic. This action will significantly improve the panoramic vista for your more conscientious downslope neighbors. Neighbors he barely knew names without faces, who lived in sprawling terracotta-roofed McMansions that had begun to aggressively colonize the pristine, fragile desert landscape he cherished. All part of the ever-expanding voracious entity known as Prickly Pear Estates, built around its incongruous, thirsty, crowning glory, a shockingly unnaturally green, multi-million-dollar private golf course, an emerald scar on the ochre earth. His small, rustic, hand-built adobe cabin, nestled discreetly amongst the ancient saguaros and prickly pear cacti, was an anomaly, a stubborn, silent holdout from a simpler, more respectful time. And he increasingly felt a deep personal irritation to Martha Thorne's meticulously crafted vision of uniform, upscale, rigidly controlled desert living. The bulldozer, as if on cue, gave a final shuddering hydraulic roar and began to retreat its treads, leaving brutal deep scars in the delicate desert soil where his memories had stood just moments before. The floodlights, one by one, clicked off, plunging the scene back into the softer, more forgiving light of the approaching dawn. The destruction looked even more stark, more violating in the natural light. Martha Thorne gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod, a general acknowledging her troops' successful maneuver. The debris will be cleared by a contracted crew before noon. You will of course be billed accordingly for all associated costs. Good day, Mr. Hayes. She turned her posture rigid, unyielding, and climbed with practiced grace into the cab of her oversized truck. The engine turned over with a powerful throaty rumble, and she drove off down the rutted dirt track that led back towards the paved, sterile perfection of Prickly Pear Estates, leaving Liam standing alone, trembling with a mixture of shock and impotent rage. The scent of shattered pine, freshly turned earth, and lingering diesel fumes was thick and sickening in his nostrils. He stared at the wreckage, a gaping wound in the fabric of his life. It wasn't just wood and nails they had torn apart. It was a piece of his history, a tangible link to his grandfather, a part of his soul. And the fight he knew, with a chilling certainty that settled deep and cold in his bones, had only just begun. His life at the cabin was deliberately fiercely simple. He was a freelance technical writer, specializing in arcane software manuals and complex engineering documentation. He could work from anywhere with a stable internet connection, a connection he often had to fight for in this remote corner of the Arizona desert. He'd chosen to return here to his grandfather's legacy after the old man passed 5 years prior, seeking solace and a measure of peace in the familiar rugged landscape and the profound, healing silence. The Prickly Pear Estates HOA had always been a distant, minor, almost laughable annoyance. Their occasional glossy newsletters, filled with self-congratulatory pronouncements about acceptable paint colors, a bewildering palette of sun-baked pastels, approved desert landscaping, which usually involved a suspicious amount of expensive non-native decorative gravel and oddly uniform cacti, and rules about holiday decorations were usually tossed unread into the wood stove. His property, after all, predated the formation of the HOA by several decades, a fact his grandfather had often grumbled about with satisfaction. But with Martha Thorne's ascent to the presidency, 2 years ago, following the sudden, mysterious resignation of her more moderate predecessor, the tone from the HOA had shifted. It had morphed from merely bothersome and bureaucratic to actively personally hostile. She seemed to harbor a particular, almost obsessive vendetta against any property, any element, any person that didn't fit her rigid, narrow vision of opulent, sterile conformity. And Liam, with his rustic cabin, his often overgrown native garden, and his clear disinterest in their social hierarchy, was a prime target. The day after the brutal demolition of his deck, the first new official violation notice arrived. This time, it was hand-delivered by a stern-faced, uniformed HOA security guard whose SUV looked more like an armored personnel carrier. The notice, printed on heavy, creamy cardstock, read, "Unapproved exterior paint color, non-compliant with Prickly Pear Estates. Approved palette, see Section 4, revised 2023. His grandfather had painted the adobe cabin a soft, unassuming desert tan, a color that blended seamlessly respectfully with the surrounding landscape. Palette C. Liam discovered with a grimace after looking it up on the HOA's slick website, favored aggressively cheerful shades like Tuscan sunset orange, Adobe rose pink, and something called desert sage glow, which looked suspiciously like lime green. Fines were clearly itemized, accruing daily with interest. Another notice followed within days, delivered with the same officious solemnity: non-regulation, native flora, excessive uncultivated cholla, insufficient decorative agave presence of unauthorized Opuntia species. His grandfather's carefully tended waterwise garden, a thriving natural tapestry of local plants that had survived decades of drought and sun, was now apparently a liability, a blight on their manufactured landscape. Liam Hayes was not by nature a confrontational man. He valued peace, quiet, and being left alone above almost all else. But the calculated, brutal destruction of the deck, the deliberate erasure of his grandfather's handiwork, followed by this relentless barrage of petty, vindictive tyrannies, had ignited a slow-burning, deep-seated anger, an anger that surprised him with its intensity. He drove his old sputtering pickup into Redemption to the small, underfunded county records office, intending to research the original covenants, the founding documents of Prickly Pear Estates. He needed to see in black and white if his grandfather's property was truly legally subject to these increasingly enormous, suffocating rules. He spent hours hunched over dusty, oversized plat maps and brittle aging deeds, the faint, evocative scent of old paper-dry ink, and decades of forgotten stories filling his nostrils. His grandfather's original deed thankfully was clear, its language simple, and direct minimal restrictions, mostly concerning water rights and access. Crucially, it predated the legal formation of Prickly Pear Estates LLC by more than 20 years. This was a small victory, but the war, he sensed, was far from over. Then, while meticulously examining a faded county utility survey map from the late 1980s, hoping to find any notation about shared well agreements or historic access rights that might offer some leverage, his finger tracing the faint property lines snagged on an almost invisible thin blue line. It snaked like a furtive serpent across the southernmost corner of his property. Unmarked, unexplained. A flicker of unease, a primal instinct stirred within him. Curious, he cross-referenced the old map with newer, more detailed digital GIS maps available on the county assessor's public website. The faint blue line on these more modern, technologically advanced maps was clearly, unequivocally labeled PPE GC irrigation main, 6-inch, Prickly Pear Estates golf course. Their primary water pipe, the very lifeblood of their emerald fairways and meticulously manicured, unnaturally lush greens, cut directly, undeniably across his land. He felt a sudden icy chill despite the desert heat seeping into the stuffy office. He raced back to the cabin, his mind reeling. He tore through his grandfather's meticulously kept records, old metal boxes filled with every deed, every piece of official correspondence with the county or developers, every tax receipt. There was no mention of an easement, no record of any agreement, formal or informal, allowing a golf course irrigation pipe to transit his property, not a single scrap of paper. A slow, cold, dawning realization began to crystallize in his mind, sharp and terrifying. They were trespassing, not just a minor accidental trespass, but a significant, ongoing, critical encroachment. Relying on his land, his grandfather's legacy, for their entire, multi-million-dollar water-guzzling venture. And Martha Thorne knew it. She had to know. His next visit that very afternoon was to Jedediah Stone, an old, weather-beaten rancher who lived even further out in the harsh, sun-baked desert, a contemporary and close friend of his grandfather's. Jed was a living repository of local history, his memory as sharp as a freshly honed tack. Despite his 80-odd years, his eyes still clear and assessing. Liam found him on his wide, shaded porch, rocking slowly in an ancient wooden chair, gazing out at the vast, silent expanse that had been his home for a lifetime. Martha Thorne. You say, Jed spat a stream of dark tobacco juice into the dust with surprising accuracy. His weathered face, a roadmap of sun and wind, tightened. She's one of that new breed. All money, no sense. Came in flash, think they own the desert air and all. Your grandpa. Will he had some serious run-ins with the original developers of that damn golf course way back when they first cooked up that fool idea. Jed paused, his gaze distant, lost in memory. They wanted to run a big water line right across his land. Easiest route for him, they said, offered him good money for an easement, real good money for the time. Did he take it? Liam asked, his heart pounding a heavy rhythm against his ribs, hope and dread warring within him. Jed shook his head slowly, decisively. Nope. Will Hayes was stubborn as a mule when he set his mind. Said the desert had enough scars, didn't need another one carved by greed. Said that much water concentrated in one place, sucked from the aquifer, would mess with the natural balance, dry up the little hidden springs further down the valley. Springs the animals depended on. He fought 'em tooth and nail, and he won far as I recall. Made a big stink at the county hearings. They had to reroute their plans, go the long way around. Or so everyone thought. Jed squinted at Liam, his gaze suddenly sharp, penetrating. You're telling me they put that pipe through his land anyway? After all that, the pieces, ugly and sharp, clicked into place with sickening clarity. The HOA, under Thorne's ruthless, iron-fisted direction, wasn't just being malicious about the deck and the petty fines. They weren't just enforcing rules. They were trying to intimidate him, to harass him, perhaps even to drive him out. To make his life so unbearable, he'd sell up cheap and disappear. Because if he started digging too deep into property rights, into the history of his land, into his grandfather's fierce defense of it, he might uncover something they desperately, frantically wanted to keep buried. Like an illegally laid, covertly installed, multi-million-dollar water pipeline. The sheer breathtaking audacity of it, the arrogance, the deceit, was staggering. The brutal pre-dawn demolition of his deck suddenly felt less like a random act of HOA overreach and more like a calculated preemptive strike. A violent show of force from an entity that knew deep down that it was profoundly, dangerously vulnerable. An entity personified by Martha Thorne that had a dark secret to protect. Liam found a lawyer in Phoenix, a city that felt a world away from his quiet cabin. Sarah Chen was a specialist in complex property and water rights, her reputation formidable. She was sharp, incisive, and no-nonsense, her office filled not with dusty law books, but with gleaming tech and digital displays. She listened intently, her expression growing more focused, a predatory glint appearing in her intelligent eyes as Liam laid out the entire Swordzu timeline, the demolished deck, the escalating fines, the discovery of the unlabeled pipe on the old map, Jedediah Stone's damning story. He even brought the tattered county map and his grandfather's pristine deed. If there's no recorded easement, Mr. Hayes, she said, tapping a sleek stylus against her digital legal pad, her voice calm but edged with steel. And if your grandfather actively provably opposed and prevented such an easement, then their irrigation pipe constitutes a significant, actionable, and ongoing trespass. A trespass they have actively concealed for decades. She paused, a small, dangerous smile playing on her lips. And if that pipe is, as you suspect, essential to their entire golf course operations, well, Mr. Hayes, that gives you considerable leverage, potentially devastating leverage. Sarah then explained that Thorne herself had a massive financial stake in Prickly Pear Estates. She wasn't just an HOA president, she was a primary investor in the development company that owned the golf course. The upcoming Desert Bloom Invitational was crucial for attracting further investment and high-end property sales, which Thorne was personally depending on to avoid a looming financial precipice related to other less successful ventures. She's not just power-hungry, Mr. Hayes. Sarah had said she's desperate. The next step, Sarah advised, was irrefutable, legally documented proof. She recommended Liam commission a formal independent land survey to pinpoint the exact location and depth of the pipe on his property, and to legally, officially document the complete absence of any recorded easement or right-of-way. The survey cost a significant chunk of his dwindling savings, but the results delivered a week later in a detailed notarized report, complete with GPS coordinates and ground-penetrating radar images, were unequivocal. The 6-inch high-pressure irrigation main ran for 153 yards diagonally across the southern corner of his land, a blatant, undeniable, and deeply buried intrusion. Armed with this unassailable evidence, Sarah Chen drafted a formal blistering letter to the Prickly Pear Estates Homeowners Association, its board of directors, and their legal counsel. It outlined the flagrant trespass in excruciating detail, demanded the immediate cessation of all water flow through the pipe on his property and the prompt complete removal of said pipe. It also included proposals for remediating the considerable damage to his land and substantial compensation for the decades of unauthorized illegal use. As a separate but related matter, they formally contested the illegal demolition of the deck and all subsequent retaliatory fines, demanding full restitution and a public apology. Martha Thorne's response was swift, arrogant, and dismissive. A glossy, heavy letter arrived via courier from the HOA's high-powered, exorbitantly expensive Phoenix legal firm. It summarily dismissed Liam's claims as frivolous, vexatious, and entirely without legal merit. It brazenly asserted a prescriptive easement due to long-standing uninterrupted use, and aggressively doubled down on the validity of all covenant violations and fines levied against Mr. Hayes. They then had the audacity to offer to graciously waive the debris removal fee for the demolished deck in exchange for Liam immediately dropping all his baseless claims and signing a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. Prescriptive easement, Sarah Chen snorted with derision when Liam read her the letter over the phone. That's rich. They'd have to prove open, notorious, continuous, and hostile use for the full statutory period, typically 10 to 20 years in Arizona, without the landowner's permission. Your grandfather explicitly, vociferously denied permission. Jedediah Stone's sworn, notarized affidavit, which I have right here, will be absolutely crucial in refuting that ludicrous claim. They're bluffing, Mr. Hayes. Arrogantly bluffing. They genuinely don't think you have the stomach or the resources to fight them. They're wrong. Liam said, his voice quiet but infused with a cold, hard resolve he hadn't known he possessed. His grandfather wouldn't have backed down, neither would he. He thought long and hard about simply taking a pickaxe and a sledgehammer to the pipe himself. The survey had identified a buried valve access point just inside his property line, almost completely hidden by a dense thicket of overgrown creosote. It would be so easy, so viscerally satisfying to sever their lifeline. But Sarah, ever the strategist, advised a more methodical, legally unassailable approach. We give them one final formal warning. A very short, unmissable deadline. We demand they cease operations of the pipe and commence negotiations for its removal within 48 hours. Then if, or rather when, they fail to comply, you exercise your fundamental property rights. But we document everything, every step, every communication. We make sure your actions are legally unimpeachable, witnessed, and justified. The 48-hour deadline came and went with deafening silence from the HOA and their lawyers. That was the moment Liam knew he had to act. The desert wind was picking up as dusk settled, whistling a mournful, lonely tune around the corners of the sturdy adobe cabin, as if urging him on whispering forgotten secrets of the land. Under the cloak of a moonless, star-dusted night, carrying a heavy-duty industrial pipe wrench, borrowed from Jedediah, a powerful flashlight, and a growing sense of trepidation mixed with grim determination, he walked to the southern edge of his property. The heavy cast-iron access cover to the main shut-off valve was rusted shut, almost fused to its concrete collar, buried under years of sand and debris. It took him nearly an hour of grunting, sweating effort, with a crowbar and a shovel, to finally pry it open. Below it, glinting dully in the focused beam of his flashlight, was a large industrial-grade gate valve, its surface coated in rust and condensation. It took all his strength, his muscles screaming in protest, the ancient wrench straining against decades of corrosion and disuse, but slowly, inch by agonizing inch, accompanied by a series of protesting groans and screeches from the rusted mechanism, he turned it. He felt a distinct heavy thrum through the cold metal as the immense flow of water within the pipe constricted, then a final decisive shuddering thud as the valve seated, fully closed. Silence. A profound, watery, almost absolute silence, where moments before there had been the subtle subterranean rush of stolen water. The next morning, Liam sat on the rough, uneven concrete slab where his grandfather's deck used to be a mug of strong black coffee, clasped in his hands, watching the sun begin its fiery ascent over the distant peaks. He felt a grim, weary satisfaction, a sense of inevitability fulfilled. He had tried to be reasonable. They had chosen this path, this confrontation. It took less than 24 hours for the first signs of panic to ripple through the manicured tranquility of Prickly Pear Estates. The first almost imperceptible sign was the sudden cessation of the rhythmic, almost hypnotic hiss and whir of the golf course's myriad sprinklers. a sound so ubiquitous, so constant, it had become an unnoticed part of the auditory background noise of the entire valley. By late afternoon, the almost obscenely vibrant artificial emerald green of the sprawling fairways, a stark, jarring color against the muted natural desert palette, had begun to show the first subtle hints of thirst and distress under the relentless, unforgiving Arizona sun. Anxious whispers among the wealthy residents, initially dismissed as rumor, soon turned to worried, then angry murmurs. By the second day, ugly, irregular brown patches were visibly rapidly spreading across the meticulously manicured, famously fast greens. The golf course superintendent, a man known for his volcanic temper, was reportedly apoplectic, his shouts echoing across the clubhouse. The much-hyped, prestigious Desert Bloom Invitational Tournament, the glittering jewel in Prickly Pear Estates' social and financial crown, was less than a week away. High-profile sponsors were calling with increasing alarm. Privileged members were demanding immediate answers, their expensive rounds of golf abruptly curtailed. Martha Thorne's perfectly composed, icily serene public facade began to show visible, alarming cracks. On the third day, Liam received a frantic, almost incoherent call from the lead partner at the HOA's high-powered legal firm. Their tone was markedly, dramatically different, no longer haughty and dismissive, but tinged with a barely concealed, rapidly escalating hysteria. Mr. Hayes, there appears to be a significant and critical interruption in the primary water supply to the Prickly Pear Estates golf course. We implore you on behalf of the entire community to cooperate fully in identifying and resolving this catastrophic issue immediately. I believe I identified the core issue quite clearly and repeatedly in my previous correspondence. Counselor Liam replied calmly, channeling Sarah Chen's cool, unwavering professionalism. He pictured her giving him a subtle nod of approval. An illegally installed concealed irrigation pipe trespassing on my private property. I've simply taken lawful measures to secure my land against further unauthorized use and ongoing damages. A choked sound like a strangled gasp came from the other end of the line. This is an unmitigated disaster. The specialized turf is dying at an exponential rate. We're facing hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of dollars in immediate damage, not to mention contractual penalties from the tournament organizers and sponsors if we are forced to cancel. We have turf replacement contracts that trigger penalties of $20,000 a day if this isn't resolved within the next 48 hours, Mr. Hayes. Liam listened, saying nothing, letting the silence stretch heavy and uncomfortable across the line. He could almost hear the lawyer sweating. Mr. Hayes, the lawyer finally said, his voice strained thin, stripped of all its earlier arrogance. Please. What will it take to get the water turned back on? Name your terms. The emergency HOA board meeting was convened that evening in the opulent leather and mahogany-appointed clubhouse, overlooking what was rapidly becoming the desiccated brown-streaked wasteland of the 18th hole. The air inside was thick with palpable tension, unspoken accusations, and the faint, sickly Swedish smell of dying sun-scorched grass. Liam, accompanied by a calm, impeccably dressed Sarah Chen, walked into a room filled with angry, anxious, hostile faces. Martha Thorne sat at the polished head of the long mahogany table, her expression glacial, her posture rigid, but her eyes, usually so cold and controlled, held a visible, undeniable flicker of raw desperation. Her knuckles were white where she gripped a silver pen. Mr. Hayes, she began, her voice, tight, brittle, struggling for its usual commanding tone. This community, this board demands an immediate explanation for your reckless, irresponsible, and deliberately destructive actions. Sarah Chen stepped forward smoothly, placing a slim briefcase on the table. My client, Mr. Hayes, has done nothing more than exercise his fundamental legally protected rights regarding his own private property. The reckless, irresponsible, and deliberately destructive actions, Mrs. Thorne, were initiated by this HOA when it illegally and under false pretenses demolished Mr. Hayes's deck. These actions continued with the decades-long concealed trespass of your primary irrigation pipe, a trespass you were made fully aware of and chose to ignore. Sarah then calmly, methodically, with chilling precision, laid out their entire unassailable case. The original property deed predating the HOA, the documented lack of any easement, Jedediah Stone's sworn videotaped affidavit, detailing his grandfather's explicit refusal to grant an easement and his successful fight against the developer's initial plans. She presented the official land survey results, the ignored formal warnings, and copies of Thorne's dismissive legal letters. She distributed meticulously organized binders of evidence to every stunned board member. The room grew unnervingly quiet as they one by one absorbed the undeniable damning proof of their collective liability and Thorne's malfeasance. "We are, however, prepared to discuss a potential resolution," Sarah continued, her voice even reasonable, yet underscored with an unmistakable firmness. "A resolution that begins with the immediate and full restoration of Mr. Hayes' deck to his exact original specifications, or better, at the HOA's sole expense. The full public dismissal of all outstanding retaliatory fines and a formal written apology from this board and from you personally, Mrs. Thorne. And of course, a legally binding, equitable proposal for a new easement agreement for the existing pipe with substantial fair compensation for past, present, and all future use of Mr. Hayes' land. Or alternatively, its prompt complete removal within 30 days and the full restoration of his land to its original undisturbed condition, also at your expense." A florid-faced board member, a man known for his aggressive business dealings and ownership of one of the largest, most ostentatious homes in the estates, sputtered, his jowls quivering. This is outrageous. It's blackmail. It's extortion." "No, sir," Sarah corrected smoothly, her gaze unwavering. "This is negotiation. Extortion is what you and Mrs. Thorne were attempting with your escalating baseless fines and the violent destruction of my client's property, all designed to intimidate him from discovering your rather significant and costly little secret. You see," she paused, letting her words hang in the air, "we also managed to unearth the original environmental impact assessment and the County Planning Commission minutes for this golf course from nearly 30 years ago. They explicitly, unequivocally denied permission for routing the main water feed across Mr. Hayes' grandfather's parcel. This denial was based on serious documented concerns about unsustainable aquifer depletion and the direct adverse impact on a fragile, historic desert spring system further down the valley. A spring, I might add, that local records indicate has been dry for nearly 15 years, now coinciding rather precisely with the golf course's full operational status." A collective gasp, sharp and audible, went around the room. Several board members looked physically ill. Martha Thorne visibly paled, her carefully applied makeup suddenly standing out against her ashen skin. This was the hidden layer of the onion, the one that went beyond mere property trespass into the realm of deliberate, potentially criminal environmental malfeasance and contempt of official rulings. The daily escalating financial cost to this community, to your property values, to your precious tournament, while that golf course withers and dies, is significant. "Gentlemen, ladies," Liam said quietly, speaking for the first time since entering the room, his voice surprisingly steady. "The cost to my peace of mind, to the memory of my grandfather, to the sanctity of my home, has also been immeasurable. I am willing to be reasonable to find a path forward. The question is, the negotiations were brutal, tense, stretching late into the night and then into the early hours of the morning. The clubhouse, once a symbol of luxury, felt like a besieged war room. But the relentlessly ticking clock of the dying golf course, the specter of multi-million-dollar lawsuits, the potential for criminal charges related to the environmental violations and the ruinous publicity were powerful, inescapable motivators. By dawn, as the first pale rays of sun illuminated the now truly pathetic state of the 18th green, a comprehensive agreement was finally grudgingly reached. The HOA, cornered and desperate, caved on every single point. Within days, a top-tier construction crew hired and paid for by the HOA, but supervised by an independent architect of Liam's choosing, began meticulously rebuilding his deck. It was by Liam's quiet insistence, larger, sturdier, and constructed entirely with sustainably sourced local lumber, a silent rebuke to the artificiality of prickly pear estates. All fines were rescinded, expunged from the records. A formal letter of profound apology, drafted by Sarah Chen and signed under duress by every board member, including a visibly seething Martha Thorne, was hand-delivered to Liam by a humbled HOA representative. The easement agreement was particularly and satisfyingly favorable to Liam. It included a substantial seven-figure one-time payment for decades of past unauthorized usage and a generous inflation-adjusted annual fee, going forward with extremely strict clauses regarding maintenance access and liability, all heavily weighted in Liam's favor. Sarah Chen also negotiated a significant anonymous contribution from the HOA to a local desert conservation fund that worked to protect and restore natural springs, a touch Liam knew his grandfather would have deeply appreciated. The final condition was the one Martha Thorne fought against with every fiber of her being, her voice rising in shrill protest several times during the negotiations. But it was the one Liam prompted by a steely, uncompromising look from Sarah insisted upon with quiet, unshakable firmness, a public televised statement of apology. As the construction on his new magnificent deck neared completion, Martha Thorne, accompanied by a local television news crew that Sarah Chen had coincidentally alerted to a story of HOA accountability and community reconciliation, stood awkwardly on the edge of Liam's property. Her face was a mask of barely suppressed venomous fury, but her voice when she finally spoke was strained, humbled, almost a whisper. On behalf of the Prickly Pear Estates Homeowners Association, she read, her eyes downcast, fixed on the prepared statement, trembling in her hand, the news camera rolling. Capturing every humiliating second, we offer our sincerest, unreserved apologies to Mr. Liam Hayes for the unauthorized and deeply regrettable demolition of his deck structure and for the considerable distress caused by our subsequent administrative actions. We acknowledge the improperly laid and long-concealed irrigation pipeline on his private property and have entered into a legally binding agreement to rectify this unfortunate situation comprehensively. We are committed to being better, more respectful neighbors moving forward. Only then, with her profound humiliation, broadcast for all the county to see, did Liam Hayes walk slowly, deliberately over to the now easily accessible valve, the news camera still focused intently, and with a single symbolic turn of the heavy wrench, allow precious water to flow once more to the desperately thirsty, dying golf course. The collective sigh of relief from the gathered HOA members and anxious golf course staff was almost comically audible. Martha Thorne resigned from the HOA presidency and all her board positions within the week, her carefully constructed reputation in tatters, her financial desperation now a public matter. The subsequent county and state investigations into the HOA's finances, the illegal pipe, and the buried environmental impact reports led to further resignations, several hefty fines for the development company, and a complete court-ordered overhaul of the board. New leadership, comprised of more moderate long-term residents, including a very reluctant but principled Jedediah Stone, who was practically drafted onto the board by a coalition of newly emboldened homeowners, took the helm. They promised transparency, fiscal responsibility, and a renewed commitment to respecting the delicate desert environment and its long-suffering inhabitants. The Desert Bloom Invitational was significantly postponed, but eventually held on a recovering, if still noticeably patchy and humbled, golf course. Liam sat on his new magnificent deck, the scent of fresh, untreated pine mixing harmoniously with the clean, familiar fragrance of the desert air. He watched the sunset paint the sky in hues of fiery orange, deep violet, and soft rose, just as he had done countless times with his grandfather. The cabin felt whole again, inviolate, his sanctuary restored, stronger than before. He had fought for his small, precious piece of the desert, for his grandfather's legacy, for his memories, and in doing so, had inadvertently brought a measure of unexpected justice and a fragile new balance back to the wider, often fractured community. The silence that enveloped him now as the stars began to prick the darkening sky was not one of loneliness or isolation, but of profound, deep, and hard-won peace. And sometimes, when the wind was just right and the world was utterly still, he'd swear he could hear the faint, distant, hopeful gurgle of a long-forgotten desert spring, slowly, tentatively finding its way back to the life-giving light.